Okay, today in the Precon Chop Shop, let's take a look at the Hosts of Mordor preconstructed deck from the Lord of the Rings set. The theme of this deck is a little muddy because of the hodgepodge of mechanics that are thrown in, but for the most part, we're reanimating creatures, playing with the amass mechanic by making a huge orcish army, while we're being tempted by the ring all at the same time. This Precon is probably a bit more complicated for new players to pick up, but it's still going to be a great pickup for players who enjoy decks that do a little bit of everything. The face commander is Sauron, Lord of the Rings, a 9/9 legendary avatar horror with trample for 5 blue, black, red that says, when you cast this spell, amass orcs 5, mill 5 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. But then it says when a commander an opponent controls dies, the ring tempts you. Amass says put 1/1 counters on an army you control. It's also an orc. If you don't control an army, create a 0/0 black orc army creature token first. Now, while this does a lot when you cast it, the 8 mana value, the 8 mana cost of it, might be too high to be really effective for a one-time effect. At 8 mana, that's still an expensive reanimation effect, even if you're milling a bit and getting a 5/5 creature. If you're instead going to focus on its second ability and take out your opponent's commanders in order to be tempted by the ring, you may find your own commander being focused out as a result. I'm not convinced this is going to see a lot of play in Commander when you compare it to the other versions of Sauron that are coming out with this set thanks to its weak one-time effect. I really think that the first upgrade most people are going to do for this deck is to swap this Sauron out for Sauron the Dark Lord. The secondary commander is Saruman the White Hand, a 2/5 legendary avatar wizard for 1 blue, black, red. It says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, amass orcs X, where X is that spell's mana value. Then it says goblins and orcs you control have Ward 2. While goblins are a classically supported tribe in Magic, I was surprised to find out that there are only a total of 73 orcs that are in these colors. Saruman might actually be a pricey single since it's an interesting goblin tribal leader with a splash of orc flavor. From Phyrexia, we had Ovika Enigma Goliath, which would be a fantastic include in a Saruman deck if you're leaning into goblins, but that might be a completely different deck tech. Saruman might have a price around $3 to $5 since it throws blue-black into the traditionally mono-red goblin deck. If you like goblins, Saruman might be a fun single to pick up. Next, let's talk about the other legendary creatures in the deck that can either be commanders of their own decks or be great in the 99. Grishnuk Bresh Instigator is a 1/1 legendary goblin soldier for 2 and a red that says when it ETBs, amass orcs 2. When you do, until end of turn, gain control of target non-legendary creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the amassed army's power. Untap that creature and it gains haste until end of turn. I'm not gonna lie here, unless you're desperate to amass orcs, this should just stay trapped in the abyss of your bulk box as soon as you can replace it with something better. This is 100% a dust collector. Grima, Saruman's Footman, is a 1/4 legendary human advisor that can't be blocked for 2 blue, black. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then, that player puts the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of their library in a random order. This thing is actually crazy because it can't whiff. If your opponents can't remove it, it's 100% going to get you a free spell from your opponent's deck. If you don't cast the spell, like it's a board wipe or something you don't want to cast, it goes onto the bottom of the deck and your opponent won't have access to it unless they tutor or are really, really lucky with their shuffles. This isn't going to be a great commander, but in any deck with blue-black, this is going to be a fantastic part of the 99. It might be another $3 to $5 card because it can't miss. Shelob Dreadweaver is a 3/3 legendary spider demon for 3 and a black that says, whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, exile it. Then you can pay 2 and put a creature card exiled with Shelob into its owner's graveyard to put 2 1/1 counters on Shelob and draw a card. You can also pay X, 1 and a black to put a target creature card with mana value X exiled with Shelob onto the battlefield tapped under your control. This is basically a Dothy Voidwalker for creatures in the command zone with a reusable ability. Getting control of the creatures isn't free, but you don't have to sacrifice Shelob to get it. This might see a price similar to Dothy Voidwalker at between $5 and $10, but it's not going to be a bad single to pick up if it does manage to go under $3. Lord of the Nazgul is a 4/3 legendary Wraith Noble with flying and protection from ring bearers for 3 blue-black. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 3/3 black Wraith creature token with menace. Then, if you control 9 or more Wraiths you control have base power and toughness 9/9 until end of turn. The fact that this creates Wraiths makes this as a Wraith tribal commander much more viable. The protection from ring bearers is basically irrelevant, but it's not exactly a bad thing. On its own, you only need to cast 8 spells to make them all huge, which might be pretty easy if you lean into a spell slinger strategy. This as a single for a brand new tribe in an established strategy probably won't be cheap. I'd be willing to drop about $3 to $5 for this, but it could go as high as 10 since it only has 2 versions. Monstrosity of the Lake is a 4/6 legendary Kraken for 4 and a blue that says, when it ETBs, you may pay 5. If you do, tap all creatures your opponents control, then put a stun counter on each of those creatures. If a permanent with a stun counter would become untapped, remove 1 stun counter from it instead. Then it has Island Cycling for 2. This is a fun flavor include, but paying 10 mana to freeze your opponent's creatures for a turn is clearly meant as a finisher. But spending 10 mana doesn't leave you a lot of room to protect yourself from being blown out by your opponents. Unless you need it for a Kraken deck, this one will probably spend a lot of its time at the bottom of everyone's bulk boxes. That is certainly a flavor win. The Mouth of Sauron is a 3/4 legendary human advisor for 3 blue-black that says, when it ETBs, target player mills 3 cards. Then you amass orcs for X, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in that player's graveyard. I guess this one is most effective as a self-mill card, but I'm not sure if 5 mana is worth it for that effect. You have blue, so blinking it could also be a thing. If you can do that, I guess you could make a pretty decent-sized orc army, but is it worth it? This is probably going to be a penny single, so if you really want it, it's gonna be dirt cheap. And speaking of things that are dirt cheap, if you like what you've seen so far, why don't you hit that like button and sub to the channel? It'll help these videos get out to more people who might like to watch them, and it'll help the channel grow at the same time. Thanks. The Balrog of Moria is an 8/8 legendary avatar demon with trample and haste for 4 black/red. It says when it dies, you may exile it. When you do, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. It is cycling for 3 and a red, and when you do cycle it, you create 2 treasure tokens. This thing is absolutely bonkers. If it's on the field and an opponent kills it, it punishes every opponent as a result. In order to cast it in the first place though, you're going to want a crap ton of treasures, so in the early game you cycle this and make treasure, then later on you use your commander to reanimate it and wreak havoc on an opponent. This thing is going to be great in a treasure deck and amazing in any reanimation deck, but due to that very limited use, it might land at a pretty reasonable price. I wouldn't put it at over $3 when it finally settles. Now, with the legendary creatures out of the way, let's look at the new Precon exclusive creatures. Moria Scavenger is pretty interesting. It's a 1/4 orc rogue with death touch and haste for 1 black/red. It says tap and discard a card to draw a card. If the discarded card was a creature card, amass orcs 1. This is a solid defender on its own, and the haste lets you use its activated ability immediately. It's a fine option for reanimation decks to get great creatures into the graveyard and still get a creature on the field, so you're not exactly losing anything. It's not mind-blowing, but it will probably be a decently cheap pickup. Orcish Siege Master is a new orc goblin lord. It's a 0/5 orc soldier with trample for 2 and a red that says, other orcs and goblins you control have trample. Then, whenever it attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Now, I haven't made a goblin tribal deck, but my understanding was that the tribe generally doesn't get big enough to warrant trample, but instead it goes very wide with a large number of goblins. I guess Krenko wouldn't mind having trample, but I mean, that's about all I can think about. You'll have to let me know if that's a correct assumption in the comments below. Either way, this isn't going to be an expensive card since it heavily relies on having another big creature on the field, and giving creatures trample without making them bigger at the same time kinda doesn't make the card any better. Corsairs of Umbar is a 3/3 human pirate for 3 and a blue that says, pay 2 and a blue, target goblin, orc, or pirate can't be blocked this turn. Whenever Corsairs of Umbar deal combat damage to a player, amass orcs 3. Now this thing is interesting. Ignoring the unblockable status for orcs and goblins, this thing giving itself unblockable to create a 3/3 army when it deals combat damage is a pretty decent deal, and then it gets 3 more counters on that army if it deals more damage. This might be particularly effective as a mono blue card that can go into a Kasmina deck or any deck utilizing blue's talent for making creatures unblockable. I really like this card, and I think it should find a home in quite a few different decks. If you don't have an orc, goblin, or pirate on the field when this drops, you're not going to get any benefits from it, so that might be a big negative for a lot of players. And thanks to that, this will probably be under $1, but I can actually see it going for around 2. Rampaging War Mammoth is a 9/7 elephant with trample for 5 red. It has cycling for X, 2, and a red, and says, when you cycle it, destroy up to X target artifacts. I was excited for this card at first, and then I kept reading it, and then I lost interest altogether. For 4 mana, you can destroy a single artifact, and that's at the very minimum. Release the Gremlins does the same thing for 1 less mana, and you create a 2/2 gremlin at the same time. The only time you'll be casting this creature is in a heavy ramp rule deck, and for 7 mana, there are way better creatures to be casting for that. This is 100% a Dust Collector. Cavern Horde Dragon is a 6/6 dragon with flying, trample, and haste for 7 red. It says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. Then, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. And here we have the first single out of the 3 precons I've covered so far that will have an absolutely gigantic price as a single. Yes, it's dependent on your opponent's artifact count to cast at a discount, but in Commander, there are plenty of mana rocks and treasures that will find their way to the battlefield. Then, this thing can plow over small defenders in the air on the same turn it comes down, and it makes you treasure if it connects. This is a budget ancient copper dragon, and it's probably going to stay between $20 and $30. It only has 1 other printing from the other boosters in the LOTOR set, so we can only hope that copies of this thing will flood the market and bring the price down a bit more. I'll be picking one up if it can get down to $10, but that might be wishful thinking because this thing is great. Summons of Saruman is a sorcery for X blue-red that says amass orcs X, mill X cards. Then you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value X or less from among them without paying its mana cost. Then it has flashback for 3 blue-red and exile X cards from your graveyard. As far as I can remember, I've never seen a flashback cost with an alternative price for X, so this is pretty wild and I like it. The card itself is okay, but being able to recast important spells and get a body on the field at the same time is pretty good. And then you can do it again if you have a decent number of cards in your graveyard. This is a Spellslinger card for sure, but thanks to my lack of experience with those type of decks, I'm not sure where this card will land on the pricing scale, but I guess I can guess and say that between $1 and $2 is about right when the dust settles. Lidless Gaze is a sorcery for 2 black-red that says exile the top card of each player's library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast them. Then it has flashback for 2 black-red. I guess this amounts to a draw 4 spell and you can cast it twice. This will probably be an instant include in Prosper decks, and given that deck's popularity, this as a single will probably see a price tag at around $2 to $5. It can see play in other Rakdos decks, but I imagine that there are more cost-effective ways to draw cards or cast your opponent's cards, so it might not be as popular in general Rakdos strategies. Wake the Dragon is a sorcery for 4 black-red. It says create a 6/6 black and red dragon creature token with flying, menace, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, gain control of target artifact that player controls. This also has flashback for 6 black-red. The token you get is pretty solid, but at a cost of 6 mana, it might be difficult to cast in those colors. Rakdos doesn't really duplicate tokens that often, so that option might be a little difficult to pull off. As good as the token is, I don't think that this will see much play, and it might not have that much demand in decks. This could be around $1, but I'll bet money that it winds up being a dust collector instead. Subjugate the Hobbits is a sorcery for 5 blue that says, gain control of each non-commander creature with mana value 3 or less. This doesn't say until end of turn, but then of course Cyclonic Rift costs the same and is an instant. And I'm not sure a player is going to want to dump that much mana to take the weakest creatures on the field unless they have a way to use them as fuel in that same turn. Any of the altars would be a pretty brutal combination depending on the strategy. I guess as a finisher this is an interesting card and will be an easy include in theft decks, but its high mana cost will hold it back from general strategies. It's still really interesting, and so it'll probably be around $1. Too Greedily, Too Deep is a sorcery for 5 black-red that says, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That creature deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. This is a reanimation spell and a board wipe for 7 that actually sounds pretty good. You're in red, so you can give it haste easily, and you can choose a creature card from any graveyard. So this is going to be great in themed decks and decent in other decks if you can generate enough mana. This might be a $4 to $5 card. Relic of Sauron is an artifact for 4 that will tap to add 2 mana in any combination of blue, black, and red. Then you can also pay 3 and tap it to draw 2 cards and discard a card. A mana rock and card filtering in these colors in a single card is actually pretty good. Thankfully, mana-hungry rocks are often passed by in favor of signets, so this, like the Golden Throne, might be pretty cheap compared to what it probably should be. Relic of Sauron will probably be $1 single. In the Darkness Bind Them is a saga for 2 blue, black, red. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 all say create a 3/3 black wraith creature token with menace. The ring tempts you. Chapter 4 says for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures and they gain haste until end of turn. The ring tempts you. The red in this card actually hurts it so much. It would be a phenomenal include in the Wraith deck commanded by Lord of the Nazgul. But for 5 mana, you're still getting 3/3/3 Menace Wraiths, which isn't bad. But this will tempt you 4 times in total, so it'll fit nicely in a Sauron the Dark Lord deck, which wants you to be tempted by the ring anyway. I'm not sure about this one. Its demand might be pretty low as a single, and considering the face commander, it might actually find its way into bulk boxes once the Precon is upgraded, which is really unfortunate. This might land at around $1 to $3 by the end of things. And then there's the Black Gate, a legendary land that says as it ETBs, you pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters tapped. You can tap it for a black or pay 1 in a black to tap it and choose a player with the most life or tied for the most life. Target creature can't be blocked by creatures that player controls this turn. This is actually a pretty strong land with a cheap cost. You're making a creature unblockable for 3 mana in black. It of course has the limitation of attacking the strongest of your opponents, but you might want to be doing that anyway. I really like this land and I can see it going for around $3 easily. I'll be surprised if it's more than 5 though. But regardless, I need one of these for my Rhea deck. And finally, we can talk about the notable reprints in the deck. Treasure Nabber is a great card for borrowing your opponent's artifacts, and it's only had 1 other printing in Commander 2018 and is sitting at around $10. It doesn't exactly fit in the precons, so it might drop in price as players replace it with cards that fit the Mordor theme better. Anger is a classic Graveyard Matters card and is around $5 across all of its printing. The reprint looks amazing and probably won't help the price drop at all. Get it if you want, but look for the best deal. Scourge of the Throne has 3 other printings and is around $15 each. This will probably be a cheap pickup at release, but it will most likely reach the $15 mark after a month or so. Reanimate is a fantastic reprint in this deck. It suits the reanimating side of it, and it's the namesake of the entire strategy. You can't find a copy of the card for less than $10, and it's been reprinted 9 times. If it's cheap, get it because it's a fantastic splashable card in any deck with black. Arcane Denial is a strong counterspell and currently runs at about $4. This reprint might not bring it down much since the card is played in so many formats, and those formats each ask for 4 copies of the card. I don't think this is going to be a cheap pickup compared to the other printings that are available, so. Okay, and then there are the expensive reprinted lands in the deck. Those are Dragon Skull Summit, Drowned Catacomb, and Sulphur Falls, which are all excellent budget land options at around $2 to $3 each. There's actually a lot more value than I expected in the Hosts of Mordor Precon deck, and while the deck itself seems fragmented with a lack of focus, it might be worth the purchase if you decide to upgrade it utilizing a different commander and putting in cards to help you focus the deck, and then taking the cards that you removed and putting them into other decks that will use them better. Playing this out of the box or only upgrading it a little bit might leave you at a disadvantage thanks to that lack of focus, but I can't deny that this thing looks like it's fun to play. I would only buy this precon to get at the other singles in the deck. There are 8 singles that I want from this precon, and their pre-release total comes to almost $60 after shipping and taxes just for those 8 cards. The precon might be a really good deal in this case, but of course it's a better idea to wait until after release to see if those prices hold or drop, and then buy the precon if it's still a good deal by then. And that's about it. Next time we'll talk about the final Lord of the Rings precon, Elven Council, and I'm totally excited to talk about yet another elf tribal deck. But anyway, let me know what you think of the Hosts of Mordor precon deck and whether you'll be picking it up to upgrade or take apart, or if you'll just be picking up the cheap singles when they're available. But for now, like the video if you liked the video, dislike it if you disliked it, and until next time, I'm Space Coconut, and you're welcome.